Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Discovering Multifamily Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Anthony Scandariato with Red Knight Properties. And today we have a special guest here with us, Andy McMullen. And Andy he's been around for a while. He's a managing partner at Legacy Acquisitions, which is focused on partnering with world-class operators. And he has, orchestrated over $750 million of commercial real estate transactions over his 20-year career. He's been on numerous podcasts and numerous publications been featured in, and he's been really focused lately on build to rent development. So we're going to talk about what that exactly means, how it is different, or is it related to multifamily? What is it? It's a real buzzword right now, and people are talking about it with not really understanding the context around it. So really excited to happy to have Andy on our show today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Anthony. I appreciate it, man. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, and I know like my background is in office and some industrial, and so that kind of background that you got is gives you another kind of layer of understanding when new trends come about. Or so we started this built to rent idea. Just let me first explain it. Just think of it as horizontal multifamily. So or multifamily pulled apart. That's the way that we manage it. It's the way that we think about it. So we build, in this case, 98 single family, 1,200 unit places, cottages really, they're little tanks really. We build them with about 20 feet of backyard, and then we enclose them, and we have the same kind of amenities that a multifamily project would have, playground, pool in some cases, clubhouse in some cases, walking trails. So that's kind of how we like to think of it. Now there's a couple of differences between multifamily, right? You can build one at a time and then get your C of O and collect rent on it. So there's a little bit more kind of flexibility there. There's a little bit more flexibility in selling them as well, because we could sell them as one complex, or we could chunk it down, cluster them into groups of 10 and sell them. Probably would not sell them one by one, because I think it's a totally different business. So that's a little bit about what it is.
So how is it different than just building multifamily, or like what are the key differences? Because to me, it
Yeah.
sounds somewhat almost identical.
It really is. And that's why I try to tell people, like, I come from a multifamily background. And so, people they hear single family rental and they're thinking like of scattered houses, in multiple counties, and trying to figure out how do you manage the properties that way when you're driving around. And so there's a lot of inefficiencies. But if you think about it now, the suburbanization has been going on for the last couple of years, even before COVID. And so now people like the idea of having maybe a little bit more space, nobody on top of them, nobody below them, nobody on the sides of them, and then they have their own doggy door and backyard. So there really isn't a whole lot of difference. We still love the multifamily asset class. We still invest in it. We still own. We're still involved. But this, I think, is a little bit different now because there's so much demand for this kind of product, right? We don't have the supply that we should, and as a result, a lot of the kind of larger institutional owners will let smaller guys like us develop, these properties, that these enclosed communities, and then they can go basically make their yield for their investors by efficient growth and efficient kind of expenses. So that's kind of why it's become much more popular now. It's become over the last year and a half. I still think we're in the very early innings, but because it does have that stickiness of tenant, people like it because the millennials, they like newer stuff. Their American dream isn't the same as yours and I's. Well, you're much younger than me, so you're a millennial. What I'm talking about. But so that's why it's become such a kind of popular, asset. One, you're getting millennials with some money, and you're getting, empty nesters, and they all want new stuff. And if we're doing it right, the only thing they have to do to manage their property is just turn the light bulb on.
Got it. So in terms of, the key differences, so you're really building, and then your strategy is to just rent them and sell them to the institutions.
Yeah, I think it depends, but I think this one that we've got currently now, it's in Lafayette, Louisiana. The idea there is we had a little bit of an unfair advantage because we already owned the land. We already had we had 6 of them already built. And so as a result, we feel like we can build them relatively quickly, 8 to 10 a month. And then if we stabilize where we think we should, and we've already kind of beat targets for rents because, no genius on our end, just rents have been climbing, right? That it probably makes a little more sense to get our investors' money back once we stabilize it. Now, if that's not the case, we could certainly refinance out, get them a chunk of cash, and then just hold them long term. We've got both of those strategies available to us.
Right. It's a good position to be in. So let's talk about it. Louisiana, pretty affordable market, I would say. And,
Yeah,
we're talking about development costs. Obviously, you didn't have to buy the land. You're already sitting on it. So I'm sure that helped your numbers out. How do you evaluate new land developments for the build-to-rent multifamily?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
So we've got 3 other sites. And really what I think the key is for us is they've got to be in the Southeast where land is a little bit less expensive, right? And then the impact fees are a little bit less. So sewer, water, those kinds of things. The infrastructure costs are a little bit less. And then we've got to find them near really kind of good neighborhood elementary schools. We want to have, because usually young families is kind of most of what our renter or resident, as we call it, is. And then it's got to have, obviously, amenities and be close to a major thoroughfare, right? So some built-to-rent communities are doing it in the suburbs and even the exurbs. We're trying to stay kind of in that middle area, close enough to, the Walmarts and the, suburbia, right? But so yeah, Lafayette, Louisiana, we were able to keep the land is a little bit less expensive. And also, I think you don't have the same kind of union issues that you do. I'm in California, and it seems like everywhere I turn, they're trying to tax us on something. And so we really want to kind of be in those development friendly areas, and a lot of them happen to be in the Southeast.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, building and renting, and obviously acquiring land that goes along with it, your target markets are spot on, but obviously some areas in the Southeast, pretty much across the country, even land is getting more pricey, and obviously the construction costs are getting more pricey, and inflation is not transitory from what we're seeing. And I think the real inflation number is probably going to be over 10% for 2021. I mean, they're going to say it's 5.5%, but
By the way, I can see you just grinning, like, owning real estate and watching inflation go up 10% is just like, an owner's dream, right? And with all the buildings that you have, I think sometimes we get caught up in that. Well, if interest rates go up, then cap rates start to go up a little bit. But when you're in this kind of inflationary time with real estate, and you've got NOI, that's basically you're passing down to your residents, that you're basically collecting all of that NOI for all that entire inflationary period, right? And so even if inflation moderates down a little bit, there's not a whole lot of difference, right, in the amount of NOI that you created, which is really the value stream. And over since the 40s, right, I think people are accustomed to rising rents, at least incrementally. And usually when inflation comes back down, it doesn't moderate back down like inflation would be. Rents continue to increase. So for people that are, just on the sidelines about real estate, in an inflationary time, it's a great place to have your money, right? And if you've got that equity kind of sitting in your house, at 5 to 10%, if you're right, Anthony, is just being sucked out of it. So get that on the lender side, let them deal with it.
Right. But what I was getting at, Andy, is if we're in an inflationary environment on the building side for the next year, at a minimum, 2022, are your construction costs, your soft costs, hard costs, land costs, are your yields still making sense? And are you able to get the rents you were originally projecting? Or like you said, you kind of, the bad thing about inflation is it does hurt everybody. And you have to pass it on to your consumer, and your consumer are your tenants. I see more people getting into the value add space, which is what we're in, buying existing and renovating and getting the rents up. at least in this inflationary period, but I see less development.
Yeah.
Even though we have an affordability problem and a supply problem. So I guess, do you anticipate your strategy being longer term because of the supply problem, or are you
Yeah, no, it's
trying
a
to?
great question. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so many kind of elements to it, in order for us to do this, when we started underwriting this project, that 1,000 foot per bore, which basically kind of measurement for lumber was in the 1500s or 1600s, right? So we were underwriting for, let's have a 15% contingency, which for your listeners is typically much more than most people will have. Luckily, it fell down. It's in that 500 to 600 range. But yeah, we had to have a lot of kind of risk mitigants. You mentioned rent. So when we started, underwriting, our rents were at like 15. Now they're at like 1650. So that's helped us a little bit. But we've got to have, a cap rate that's, 100 basis points above where market is. We want to make sure that we've got, expense ratio, even though they're typically less than multifamily, they typically run in that kind of 32% range because it's newer stuff. We wanted to make sure we were in that kind of 35 to 38. So to answer your question, kind of big picture wise, yeah, absolutely. You've got consider labor costs, right? You got to consider, what's your cost per construction now and supplies. And I'm here in California and we can't figure out the port issue, right? We've got just 500,000, containers just floating around, right? So there's a lot of risks, and that's why we want to make sure we have those mitigants, which again comes back to, can we build for, in our case, $130,000 a door all in some markets. If we can get rents that are 18 or 2,000 or 22, then we can inch up more than that. But I still see us being able to, in the built to rent space, because of what you mentioned with supply. I think rents will continue to rise, and I think that they will outpass that extra added cost of inflationary construction costs and supply chain issues. But there's a lot of places you can't build, right? There's, like, as you said, it's just the land's too expensive and it doesn't make sense even with our major supply issues.
yeah, and hopefully that that keeps up and you are able to build relatively affordably and obviously still be profitable, because as the inflation goes on, it does get a little bit more challenging. Is that the only strategy that you're really working on right now, the build to rent? Obviously
Built
it's
to
a
rent,
more long term, 2 to 3 year
yeah.
process to get it up and running anyway.
No, I still really like multifamily. I mean, we've got a fund and we invest in multifamily projects really across the country. We were doing sponsor deals in California up till a few years ago, and it just became, too unpredictable to get our investors the returns that they, because of rent control and cash for keys and the rest. So for now, it's really about us trying to partner up with just world-class operators that are, good at what they're doing, but great in the community as well. I mean, that's like a big piece for us. So, really along the summer, we bought something in North Carolina, Texas, working on something right now, another one in Austin. So we still like multifamily, and we still know that it's got, because of the supply issues and because of inflation, I think that there is probably a little bit of uneven, between cap rate really for some heavy value add stuff. But I think that because we're benefiting from all the other ways you can make money in real estate for the investors with depreciation and, where appreciation is, et cetera, hedge against inflation, I think that there's still tons and tons of opportunity for multifamily.
Any other asset class?
No, I mean, we've looked a little bit at storage. I think storage is something that I've invested in. We as a group, as Legacy, have not yet. So I think that there's always opportunity there. I think mobile home communities, because of the scarcity there, I think there's great opportunities there. Our background, I think, was in office, and I'm not as keen on that, although I do think there's people that are doing it well, retail and triple net. But I think we try to fit in those holes where we feel like we've got the most kind of economies of scale, and our guys know how to underwrite it, and our guys know how to vet the operator, and we don't have to start learning a whole new asset class.
Yeah. And you've been through previous cycles before. So how is this cycle different on the supply side? Did we have a supply
Yeah,
issue
well,
last?
so, we haven't really been building for like, I mean, it's honestly been 12 years. I don't know where you were. In 2008, we were developing a project in Venice area. And yeah, as you know, just shut down, right? Completely, banks just shut down. They weren't lending anything. So we were able to kind of hang on by just bridge lender after bridge lender and trying to get our renters in, But, remember for like 2009, nothing, 10, nothing, 11, nothing. Really wasn't until like 12 it started to come back where you really felt like maybe there's some opportunity here. And even if you listen to even some of my friends way smarter than me, way smarter than I, see, that's what I should have said, way smarter than I, were, stopped investing in 2017, right? And so for 3-4 years, they've been wrong. So I think that at this point, now there's just so much kind of inflation we're seeing in the properties that we own in California. It would be really hard for me to see a collapse because of the supply. And the government's basically said, we're going to let it run. And if they, prop up interest rates a little bit, that's fine. I think that would maybe moderate some things. But I don't think, I'm here in California, we haven't figured out a way to kind of help, with supply, and even developing it, it's hard. So in many counties it is. So I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. I mean, do you feel that we need to kind of batten down the hatches, or we got a longer runway?
Yeah, make a long story short, I think we got a longer runway. I'm curious to see what the effects of kind of, states that you're in, like California and New York, kind of lingering eviction moratoriums, once those are, because they are enacted at the state level. I think California just expired. New York is still in place, and New Jersey to the end of the year. Once those expire, it'd be interesting to see, at least in the larger metropolitan areas. I think Chicago still has this in place. What that has on, effect on supply. I heard from some home builders that, there's going to be more supply on the residential side and on the single family side than what they thought, because, people are going back to the cities, and, so there's many different opinions, but on the whole, I think you're right in terms of, on both the existing multifamily side and on the build to rent side, in certain areas where there are where there is population growth and a lot of other things, good economic indicators going for those states to build and also invest in. So it's real estate is hyper local. So that's all I would have to say about it. Andy, as we wind down the show, how can my audience, find you, learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Reach out to
So legacyacquisitions.com, we've got quite a few resources for either passive investors or partners that want to learn a little bit more about what we do. I'm all over LinkedIn, as I know you are, Anthony. So reach out. I would love to help. I love to help newer investors or newer entrepreneurs. So please do so.
Excellent. It was great to have you, Andy. It's a pleasure and an honor. And if you liked what you heard and or saw today, please give us a rating and review on iTunes so Andy and myself can get our message out to a greater audience. That's just the way it works. So we appreciate that and look forward to talking to you again soon, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. Me as well.
Thank you.